All right. Well, this morning, whatever Bible or device you have on which you have a Bible, I want to encourage you to check out Proverbs with us as we've been reading through Proverbs all this past week as we're reading through the Bible together. And we got a lot of ground to cover, but here's what we're going to do, a little bit something different. We have read some really amazing truths about the power of the wisdom of God over these last 2 Sundays and the week around that as we've been reading through Proverbs. And one of those we talked about a little bit last week is found in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. It just says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." And then just in Proverbs 9, verse 10, it says something similar. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight." So it's telling us here that to be able to get a full picture of knowledge of what's real and what's going on in terms of all of creation, and to be able to truly be wise, which means to have an understanding and to know how to act according to the knowledge that we have. It all starts with what? What do we say it starts with? The fear of the Lord. And last week we talked about how the fear of the Lord means not necessarily that you're walking in terror all the time. It means this awe and respect of the creator of the universe. That's the fear of the Lord. That's where we find the beginning of true knowledge and the beginning of wisdom. So today, I wanted us to see, because we've been looking over the last few weeks in terms of the what's called the wisdom literature in the Bible, how ultimately it all points to God. It's all about knowing God. But I also today wanted us to see that there are some things that he says, this is the specific answer to some of the questions you're asking. These are the ways that I have created the universe to operate, and if you align yourself with these things, then not that it's a promise it has to and always will go better, but that it is prescriptive is the way we said it. It is something that the percentages are, if you follow God's ways, that things are going to go well for you. So today, just to help us see how all-encompassing God's wisdom is, not even looking at the other 65 books of the Bible, but just at this book of Proverbs, we're going to look at some subjects. In fact, let's see that slide here. No, I hope y'all can see the words up there. It probably would have been better in black now that I look at that this way. But anyway, you see there's 10 different subjects up here. 12 different subjects up here. Anger, money and wealth, debt, happiness, sex, women, parenting, instruction and correction, decision-making, work and laziness, power of words, health, and justice. All right, it's a big list, broad categories, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to be thinking about a question from one of these categories, and if you have more than one question, as long as we have time, we'll answer those. But I want us to look today and see, just in Proverbs, how God has some very cut and dried answers for this is how you deal with situations, or this should be the direction of your life as relates to these subjects. So, take a moment, be looking at those categories. I feel like there ought to be some game show music or something going on here, but we don't have that set up for us today. And think of a question. And let's see what Proverbs has to tell us about God's wisdom as it applies to these areas. Do 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 do. I'll sing "Happy Birthday." That's now public domain now. Yep.
Speaking of happy birthday,
Yes.
why does it feel like sometimes, even though you're trying to do the right thing, it doesn't make you happy.
All right. Why is it that it seems like sometimes, even when you're trying to do the right thing, that it doesn't make you happy? And let's see, in the category of happiness, let's see which one of these verses that I've got here might work for that. How about this one? It's because, and we touched on this one last week, there is a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is the way of death. The idea is if we're just doing what we think is right, but it's not what God says is right, then we're going down the wrong path. And so it's not going to make us happy.
What is happy?
Ma'am?
What is happy?
That's a really good question. I'm glad that you mentioned that. In the Old Testament, oftentimes we see the word blessed. In English, we see it translated blessed a lot, but in more recent translations, oftentimes will just say happy, because the idea is content and full, fulfilled, and happy. So when you see the word blessed, oftentimes you could insert the word happy, because it means that you are content and fulfilled in your life.
But when we talk about happiness, are we talking about contentment? Like when we culturally, when I say I want to be happy,
What are we usually thinking of?
I want to be content. I want to be
Ecstatic.
pleasure.
Yeah.
I guess
Yes.
this is the word to use.
Yes.
Context.
I missed that. Maybe I'm glad. I don't know.
Like,
Hopefully the mic didn't pick it up either, right? No, just
it's
kidding.
it's a self-serving thing.
Okay.
It's about me and my edification.
Exactly. All right.
So is that consistent with what you just said about blessed?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Let me read to you from Proverbs chapter 3. It says, "Blessed or happy is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her, from wisdom, is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold." So we oftentimes think if I get enough money or if I get enough stuff, that it's going to make me happy. Even though we all would say, well, money can't buy happiness, but we still live as though it does oftentimes. But here we see it says that the person who finds wisdom, the ability to know what God says is best and to do it, for that person, they're going to find out that wisdom is a far greater reward than silver or gold or the happiness we might be pursuing for ourselves. All right? Next.
I do think that contentment has a little bit to do with happiness, though. Because when you think about your question, why do you want to do good things or follows a lot of these patterns? Why is it that I'm still not happy? Well, because usually the rewards that come with that are not the ones we necessarily seek. I'm not content with, well, I'm doing nice things for my neighbors, but I'm not getting anything in return. The reward for that is the generosity that I've given. But what I'm seeking is some kind of reward, and therefore that's the real lack of contentment. And so that's why I feel like I'm not happy. When, the Psalm I'm thinking of, 37:4, it was only for a long time intrigued me. It says, delight in the Lord, and he'll give the desires of your heart. Everyone looks at that and they're like, oh yeah, if I just focus on God, like I get what I want.
Whatever I want, yeah.
But think about it, the more I focus on God, the more, you become Christ-like. What kind of things would you like? Those that Christ was more interested in. So it's not that you get whatever you want, you actually start wanting more of what God wants. And people... And
that's the point.
They think, oh, well, I've done the Proverbs thing, I should be happy, I should have more money or a job, blah, blah.
Right.
The more you focus, the more you should be Christ-like.
That's right.
Right.
Okay, cool. What else?
Do the Proverbs tell us how to eat properly?
Do the Proverbs tell us how to eat properly? I don't. All right. There are things about health, but one thing that is not specifically in one of these categories, although maybe it could have been, this is not an exhaustive list, obviously, of all the things that you can find. And I don't have every verse in Proverbs tagged to a category. But one thing that I thought of when you asked that question is that it says that when you sit down to eat before at the home of, and I'm paraphrasing, a wealthy person, be careful not to eat all of his dainties, all of his spicy and rich foods, because it's just going to suck you into wanting that kind of stuff, which is not really good for you. So that might be one thing that is category. Another thing is, over and over it talks about how nothing is sweeter than honey, and so honey is a natural sweetener for people who aren't diabetics like me to be able to have that rather than the amounts of processed sugar and artificial sweeteners that we oftentimes consume today. So
one of the verses that I had, and this kind of answers both Jordan's and the health one. I don't know. So it's in 30, and it's the Proverbs of Aguar, or sayings of Aguar. It says two things. This is verse 7, by the way, 7 through 9. Two things I ask of you, Lord, do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. That's one. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. And so I think the answer to both of those questions is contentment. Neither too much food, nor too little food, but like the right amount. Which as an American, that's
And I think he goes on to say, because if I have too much food, I won't need you, and if I don't have enough food, I might bring discredit to your name by stealing to get food.
Usually when they talk about food in Proverbs, from what I've been reading, it's usually about gluttony versus,
Right. Not the specific types of food.
Not necessarily. All right, well, here's your fruit diet.
No, that's it. For drink, it says wine is a mocker and beer is a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them cannot be wise.
True. Yes.
It doesn't say.
I used to.
It doesn't say to don't drink them, though.
Yeah,
It doesn't say.
led astray.
It says not
No.
Astray. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it does.
It doesn't say.
It's funny. In other ones, it does say that there's, and I can't remember the actual one, but like there is that value to the wine, but at the same time, don't be led astray.
Yes. Yeah, there's one place in Proverbs where it talks about how wine kind of brings a rosy cheeks and a glow to your face or something like that. And if we get away from Proverbs, and Paul told Timothy to have a little wine for his stomach, which some people say, well, that means that I can drink all I want. And it's true. He does say use that. But if you had to tell him to drink some for his stomach, it means he probably wasn't drinking any before that. So, it's not like, hey, just go drink whatever you want, as much as you want of it, because that's where it becomes it leads you astray. I used to say, because, the Bible says it's all things are good in moderation. And then just a few months ago, I realized that's not in the Bible. That was Greek philosophers. But so.
There's also a verse that says, "Do not drink if it makes your brother stumble."
And that's true. That's exactly. And
Bible,
Romans.
everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
Right. So I can eat all of the food that I want, but that doesn't mean it's beneficial to me. All right. How about any other questions related to these topics that we have here?
I'll take sex for 500.
Yes. All right. Well, why don't you look at Proverbs 5 with me? And I think that's against the law, by the way.
Wow. Well done.
I think I just saw a kid go in the kitchen.
Oh.
Crazy if that's you.
See?
Go back and shut the door.
Maybe I've been drinking some wine. Are my cheeks looking rosy right now? All right. There's a lot in this chapter about good and not so good. So let's start off with a few on the negative side. Now I know let me just read this. Verse 1, the first 5 verses, let's read this. My son, be attentive to my wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion, and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. Now, I remember last week the issue of sex came up a little bit, and the question was, because it was talking about the woman of ill repute, saying, why is it just talking about women? But I think just as we see wisdom personified as a woman in Proverbs, we oftentimes also see immorality, sexual immorality, as the kind of in juxtaposition to wisdom. So you've got these two female figures. One is wisdom to be exalted, and the other is immorality that is warned against. So you see here this warning. Look, looks good, but lips dripping with honey, but it's a bad path. You go down that path, it leads to Sheol, which is the place of the dead. So in other words, it's going to be that. There's a number of other places that talk about that, but let's move a few verses down to verse 15. Here we see Solomon talking about this is God's plan for sex and sexual fulfillment according to the designer's instructions. All right? So he says, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. What's he saying there?
Stick to your own life.
Yes. Yes. You and your spouse. That is where that's where you're going to find the sexual fulfillment according to God's wisdom. Verse 16 said, should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Let me stop right there, because although I see us moving away from that as kids whose parents were involved in multiple marriages and the idea of a starter marriage and to get you ready for your next marriage, we see that addressed here, that we are to rejoice in the wife, or for ladies, in the spouse of your youth. He goes on in verse 19, says, a lovely deer, a graceful doe, let her breast fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. In other words, nothing's done in secret. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he's held fast in the cords of his sin. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he's led astray. So here he's saying, be faithful to your spouse. You should be fulfilled in your relationship with your spouse. Don't go looking for fulfillment in the thrill that is often found and going elsewhere. There's a reason why sexual immorality and unfaithfulness in marriage is so common. It's because there is a thrill. There is an excitement. There's a freshness, that infatuation stage maybe of love. But Solomon says you need to be focusing on committing yourself to your spouse so that you and your spouse and your relationship, including your physically intimate relationship, is something that here he talks about being intoxicated. That feeling of that good feeling inside can be found, but it starts with a choice that I am going to seek that only with my spouse and not anybody else. And just to make sure, because like I said, there's lots of verses that talk about this, but a great picture, I think, of what happens when we think we can mess around with sex outside of marriage. In chapter 6, verses 27 through 29, it says this: can a man carry fire next to his chest, or some translations may say in his lap, and his clothes not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? All right, I know people do that, but they're crazy. All right. So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. You see the picture here? Saying sexual immorality is like trying to hold fire next to your body and thinking you won't get burned. That there's just no way you're going to be able to do that and not have it come back to bite you, to burn you, to haunt you, to bring punishment, the consequences, just like when you hold fire. So the focus is just as it is in everything else that we see from Genesis chapter 2 to Jesus in Matthew and Paul in Ephesians 5. It's all about a man and a woman and their relationship with one another, in focusing on that relationship without allowing anything else to distract and pull away. Because to do that, or to allow that to happen, means it is to be foolish. It is to be a fool, because only a fool would know they were going to get burned and die and still go down that path. Okay?
I think it's worth noting that and this is something that's becoming more prevalent in maybe not our media culture, but the culture as a whole, that there's two things. It's implied that it's a committed marital relationship.
Yeah.
It's not talking like a young dude who's not in a marriage relationship, like
Yeah.
a wife. So, and then it's also implied that it's a monogamous relationship,
Mm-hmm.
which is ironic because this is Solomon, who had far too many wives.
Yes.
But he's at least communicating the truth that it's a monogamous, not a polyamorous relationship too. And I think that's something that neither of those two features are things that are cool in our culture. They're not accepted realities.
Yeah, the thing about the polyamorous, verse 17 says, "Let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you." All right? It is not about anybody else. It's just you and your wife, or you and your husband.
But I mean, that also
Yeah.
discredits like polygamy too, having
Yeah.
multiple spouses,
Right.
because it's still communicating the same thing. It's just two individuals, not anymore.
Yeah, and the irony, as you said, is that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines.
We'll get to that next week.
That's Ecclesiastes, right? Well, Song of Solomon and then Ecclesiastes are in there. Yes.
Obviously, he experienced consequences.
Yeah.
Able to write about it.
Yes.
He did.
Absolutely. He was speaking from experience and learning the hard way, it sounds like there. Okay.
You know, I would even add, it's not just that it's unpopular. I think it's so unpopular that you probably couldn't even get most people to tell you why you don't have sex outside of marriage. You know, so Sarah and I, we met actually serving together in church, and we used to have the kids, and we even did the middle school ministry. And I was a 7th grade leader. I had about 20 to 25 students every weekend. When we had the sex week, I gave them like some time to ask questions, and something came up, and so I asked them, I returned it to them, and I said, well, guys, tell me, like, why don't you have sex before marriage? And I mean, the answers they were coming with, some of them were very comical, some were even like really good guesses, I think, but none of them hit it. And finally, this little boy in the back, I remember, was like, well, doesn't sex kind of like bring you closer together, and so you shouldn't really do that with everyone? And
Wow.
it blew me away, but I mean, you know, we're sitting here 5 minutes and everyone's trying to give an answer, and if that's the ratio, not that this, of course, is statistics would tell you it's a very, very bad sample size, but you know, for the just humor me for a moment. But imagine if that is truly a good example of what I could expect. I mean, 1 out of 20 kids can even give you like a slight answer towards why you don't do it.
And that's in a church setting.
You know, and that's what I'm saying. These are church kids. These are not like the kids that I've taken off the street. I mean, how much worse would it be out there? But most of them don't know. When I have conversations with my lost friends, and it's like, well, yeah, this is what I believe, and this is why. It's so funny, their reaction. It's like they're hearing it for the first time. It's like, wow, that's really romantic, or wow, that's really interesting. Like, these are the responses I get. Usually, to be honest, it's women that are interested in talking about stuff like this. Guys are just like, oh, man, yeah, thanks. But, sorry, but, you know, like, they really just, it's not even just that unpopular, they're completely clueless as to why we do what we do.
But I think that's also because not even churches talk about this. You know, even
we're all laughing, like, oh, sex, people don't want to talk about it. So, of course, your middle schoolers are not going to know why we don't do this.
Yeah.
You know, like, we're setting our next generation up for failure.
Yeah, like, where's our middle schoolers right now? They're in there.
Mm.
You know, like Sarah, I remember her telling me, she read something, she's like, if you haven't had that talk with them before 9, it's too late. And I'm just going, what? 9? I can't even imagine. I remember when my little brother was 9, and he just wanted to play with building blocks and stuff. How do you transition from, now that you've done your Lincoln Logs, it's time to have a talk? Like, you know what I mean? But that's crazy. But considering what they talk about, I wouldn't be surprised. My middle schoolers, they talked about how they're dating every week. And I'm thinking, what does that even mean? They couldn't even tell me.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that means she sits with me at lunch. And she has to text me before she goes to sleep. They
Wow.
know these things, but they have no clue what they're jumping into.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to kind of put a ribbon on this, I mean, if there's other discussion, we can continue, but I do want to say this, because oftentimes, and Kara makes a good point about how churches avoid the topic. And when they do talk about it, it seems like the vast majority of times it's in a negative way. Don't do this. Avoid that. Stay away from it at all costs until you get married, and then we can't talk about it even then. But what I want you to see is that with everything that God wants us to do, that rather than just focusing on the negative aspect of it, focus on why God wants it that way. And you said only one kid in the class even came remotely close, but notice that some of the words that Solomon uses here, he talks about blessing and joy or rejoicing, about delighting and feeling intoxicated with, just so happy and high from the feelings. So not that feelings are necessarily a part of it, but what we see here is God's way blesses and delights and fulfills and gives calls for rejoicing, and everything else may have a temporary high, but then there's a crash. Or there's an addiction and an imprisonment and enslavement to something that then only hardship and God can usually lead to freedom from. Even though I ended with a preposition. All right? Okay.
Talking about slavery.
Yes.
Should we have debt?
Speaking of slavery, there's a good one. What does the Bible say about debt? That's Proverbs 22 verse 7 says this: the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. What does that mean? In what way is someone who borrows or who is indebted to someone else, in what way are they a slave to their creditor?
They're constantly thinking about having to pay that back. It's like a burden.
It's a burden they bear of trying to think about how to pay it back. Yeah.
They have power over you. So my credit card company can be like, well, you owe me X amount of money, so if you don't pay this back, I can leverage my power against you. Or the mortgage company or Orleans or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. We want your we demand your obedience, that you pay us back at least this much money on this day, and we don't care how you get it. You do what you have to do to make sure you pay us that amount of money on this day, or else we're going to drive you crazy with phone calls from debt collectors, and we're going to take you to court if it's a significant enough financial debt. Creditors have power to make you do what you would not otherwise do if you were not indebted to them. That's slavery.
In a lot of ways, you're also at their mercy.
Yeah.
I had a good friend that one of his student loan companies changed a lot of terms. And, the fortunate thing was some were not in his favor. And I remember how mad he was, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to take this forward," and all this. And I just kind of sat there and said, "I got to be honest, but there's not much you can do, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's within their power to change the terms, and that's what you signed up for. You actually are the one that doesn't really have the right to do that. They do."
Right.
And it's true for what I've noticed for most situations where you're at, the mercy of someone else when you are indebted to. Even, I hate to say it, even renting like an apartment at home, they put the terms on there, and you're indebted to, even though you provide money as a service. But I remember one saying, we changed it that now you're responsible to mow the lawn and pay the HOA fees, and it's just like, well, in their lease agreement, it was subject to change, without notice. That was in there. And I remember my friend, again, a different friend, that he was upset about it. And that's all you can be is angry.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ultimately the same with mortgages too, though.
Yeah.
And homeowners associations, and which is a weird. It's not technically debt, but they still, it's your property, but you still have to follow their rules type of.
That's right.
Weirdness, like. So, is there any how do we deal with that? Because okay, cool, don't get in debt, but it's too late for pretty much everyone in here. So. We all have some form of debt, I'm sure.
So what do you think? How do you avoid debt? Being enslaved.
Well, the only way is to pay with cash, but you have to somehow get that cash first.
Okay.
Before you even do it and save it.
Got to get the cash to pay for it. Yeah.
Does that count debit? Do you consider debit as? Because we're kind of a cashless society.
Yeah.
So.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Debit-
it's
debit
right,
counts as
yes,
point of
it's
sale.
not-
So
it's
these are
not-
liquid assets.
Because if you don't have the cash in your account, you
Yeah,
can't use
yeah,
your debit
okay.
card.
The numbers in front of the decimal point in your bank account have to be enough.
All right.
So, well, what about though if there's something and you don't have the money for it? Okay, let's set mortgage aside for right now because it's a really big one, and there are different ideas about that in terms of how it's even counted as debt. But let's think about other things other than housing. What do you do when there's something that you just don't have the money for? If being indebted makes you a slave, how do you handle that? What's the best way?
If it's something you don't need, you won't get it.
Okay.
Do you need that spiffy t-shirt?
Yes.
I saw that post that Keenan had yesterday.
I needed that.
That was at you,
No one
Keenan.
helped me out either.
Mm-hmm.
Or the TV or the new car, or if your car already works, then some people do need a new car, but some people just get a new car because the terms are good and they like the look of it.
I did that.
Yes.
I think some of it is not just that, it's also education, proper education of what that looks like. Like one thing I know that I want to talk to my son about when he grows up is just dealing with that and preparing for him as well, because nobody tells you about what student loan debt is going to look like. They just tell you that if you want to make it and get somewhere, you need to get a student loan and go to a good college.
Yeah.
I hate to put it simply, but once they see that you have a degree, they don't really care where it's from.
Yeah.
So why didn't I go to state college? I could have just gone to community college and worked. I did the math before. It's like if I would have just worked how much I did in college, I could have paid my way through college without any debt at community college.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what they tell you in school. In
Yeah.
high school, they're like, apply to all these state colleges, as many, see if you can get in a really good one. Here's who you talk to get student loans, and the government will help you with like 5% of it. But that's what they're telling you, and so I think a lot of it too is a re-education to be able to say, well, son, do you know what you want to do with your life? Do you even need to go to college for that? I remember at one point I was thinking of maybe going into vocational ministry, and so I told the guy mentoring me, I was like, all right, so I need to go to seminary next. And I love what he said. He said, don't go to seminary trying to find out whether you should be in vocational ministry. Figure out if you should be in vocational ministry, and then figure out if seminary is how you get there. And I hate to say it, but we don't do that with education. You know, whoever tells their kids, like, oh, don't rush to go to college, just figure out what you want to do first. If you need college to get there, then do that. But, you know, we don't educate our kids that way. And what they're getting in school is the exact opposite. Debt is what they're learning. And so I think some of this, too, is just a re-education to whether you're students or friends, it's like, hey, you really need to go to college for that.
Yeah. I think part of dealing with debt is having a biblical, godly understanding of material wealth and what it's about and what you do with it, which is one of the categories. So let me just touch on that real quickly, and then maybe we'll have time for one more subject or so. But starting off, Proverbs 3 verses 9 and 10 says, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. In other words, your material wealth, what you work to earn, what God gives you the ability to work to earn, belongs to Him. And if you acknowledge that by giving the first portion to Him, then you're saying, Lord, I am trusting you completely with everything that I have. Is God more likely to honor you acknowledging Him first with your financial resources, or if you say, I've got to take care of all of my needs by my own self, and then if I have some left over, then I'll give some to God? It's if you honor Him first, right? Just like with your time, your energy, your talents, your gifts. So that's where it starts first, because if I honor the Lord first, that's going to help me to begin weeding out a lot of those things that I really think I need. Another thing that Proverbs says about wealth is, whoever trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf. So in other words, if you're trusting in your riches to make you content or to make you secure or to make other people like you or think that you're somebody special, then you're going to fall flat on your face. It doesn't work. Those who seek God first in a right relationship with Him flourish. In other words, it's like a healthy plant that has green leaves that are growing and is producing fruit. Another thing to help us keep things in perspective is in Proverbs 11:4 it says, riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. In other words, when we stand before God, He's not going to ask, what does your bank account look like? How much money have you got? It's, are you right with me? So that makes it not the most important thing in our lives. Once again, we see over and over again, acknowledging God first is most important. Another thing to keep in mind is Proverbs 19:17 is one of a number of places it talks about generosity. It says, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and He will repay him for his deed. In other words, we think, I can't afford to be generous. Sounds to me like you can't afford not to be generous. Because God honors generosity, but when we keep it all to ourselves, then we're making ourselves the idol that stands between us and God and obedience to God and being Christ-like, which is going to bring all kinds of other trouble into our lives.
I think Proverbs 6 also engages, especially on the how do you get out of it. It definitely correlates with those when he's talking about when you put up security in your neighbor, basically when you put yourself into debt. So do this, my son, verse 3, to free yourself, since you've fallen into your neighbor's hands. Go to the point of exhaustion and give your neighbor no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. Basically, work, pay it off, get out of that debt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Be serious about it and don't just sit in it forever and wait for it to somehow fix itself.
Yeah. Right. And there's another verse in Proverbs 16:26 that says, a worker's appetite works for him, his mouth urges him on. In other words, when there's a need like hunger that motivates you to work harder. Sometimes we don't work as hard as we could, or we don't take all the opportunities we could. And he said, but when you have a need, like to get out of debt, that should be motivation to work harder, because sometimes you're at a point you can't work any harder. But a lot of us, there's more things that we could be doing to help get out of that financial situation of debt or poverty. One more topic, maybe. Let's see. Anybody have another one that's
Power of words.
curious about? What?
Power of words.
The power of words. This is a big one. This is a big one. Let me just read. I'm not, without comment right now, let me just read some things about the power of words in your mouth. And you be thinking about, how does this apply to me? Well, how am I doing on this? Proverbs 21:23. Those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity or disaster. That's pretty important. Proverbs 10 verse 11. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life. Proverbs 16:23. I like the way the Good News Translation says it. Intelligent people think before they speak, and what they say is then more persuasive. Proverbs 10:19 says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lip is prudent. In other words, when somebody talks on and on and on and on, they are going to sin. But the person who is sparing with their words is wise. Proverbs 12:18, there is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Scoffers. Anybody know any of these? People who make fun of everything? Scoffers set a city aflame, but the wise turns away wrath. All right. Got to remove the arrow from between my eyes there, because I know I do that as well. Yep. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. That's Proverbs 16:24. And Proverbs 16:28 says, a dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisperer, a gossip, separates close friends. What'd you hear there about the power of words?
I need to talk less.
Okay.
Think a little bit.
Yeah.
Before. Think more than I talk. Instead of the other way around.
How does that work with somebody who's a freestyle? Maybe not while not in your work, maybe.
Yeah, separate my work and my home and my
Yeah.
personal life. Right?
There you go.
Sometimes
What else?
you just need to pray before you open your mouth.
Yeah, not only think but pray. Exactly.
And not sometimes, all the time.
Yeah. There you go. Now, just remembering what the Word of God says can help us think about, oh wait, that's gossip. Oh wait, that's scoffing. Oh wait, that's like a sword thrust because it's going to hurt somebody when I say it. Oh wait, that's foolishness. That's a lie. That's, all kinds of things that we've mentioned here could lead to calamity, disaster.
I think it goes back to the verse that Jonathan was saying earlier, all things are permissive, but not everything is beneficial. Sure, I can say this, but is it going to benefit me or whoever I'm speaking to?
Yeah. That's a great point, I think, to connect that with everything. For those of us who have put our faith in Jesus, we are forgiven of our sins, not just in the past, but in the future as well. They are all covered and paid for in God's side because Jesus paid for them all. So that means that I can sin in any way, and God has already paid for it, so that it's not going to keep me from going to heaven once I have truly, been born into the family of God through faith in Jesus Christ. But while the consequences of those actions and words and thoughts and ways of thinking still exist in this natural realm, there are still consequences of calamity and death and broken relationships and any of a number of other things where when I'm acting foolishly rather than wisely, I get a fool's reward. which is usually painful in varying levels. So, there is today in our world a growing movement of people and preachers who would say, hey, it's all under grace. I can do whatever I want. And for a Christian, it is true you can do whatever you want and still go to heaven. But two things. Number one, if you truly are a Christ follower, then your desire should be you want to be like Christ and to act like Christ and think like Christ and speak like Christ and be wise like him. And number two is, as I said before, there's going to be consequences for your actions and for the way that you live your life, even if you're going to heaven. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 says there are some who will make it into the heaven, and my paraphrase is, but they'll have the smell of smoke on them. I mean, they're in because of Jesus, but they did nothing beyond that, So, yes, it may be permissible, but not prudent or wise or beneficial.
I think a lot of what makes the power of words so dangerous is it's very deceptive of how dangerous it can be. You read these articles and these interviews about people who, they were drunk driving and they killed someone. And I mean, most of them, they're absolutely just heartbroken.
Yeah.
Because they never thought that could happen.
Was not their intention at all.
They just didn't think that they're driving a 2-ton bullet. And
yeah.
I hate to put it that way, but we think of our car as a vehicle to get us to places, but it also is a huge weapon. And in the same way, we think of our words just as a way to communicate, but it's also dangerous. And I think that's a lot of what I forget, or why I a lot of times get in trouble with my wife. It's because, to me it's just a joke, just another thought, but it actually hurts. And you forget, where it's just like,
yeah.
This is a 2-ton word.
Yeah. That's a great point for us in our relationships, most especially in marriage, which is the most important human relationship that we have, is that the way that we speak to one another is both a thermostat and a thermometer of our relationship, because the way that I speak to my wife determines how much, how I'm loving her. And it also, so it's a thermometer, but it also can change the temperature. It can raise the heat if I speak in ways that are more like sword thrusts, because I'm attacking her, than words that bring healing, which is going to help her be lifted up and to be more whole and to be more blessed. So relationships oftentimes live and die based on the power of the tongue and how it's used, whether it's a weapon or a means of healing.
Proverbs 18:21 says, "The tongue can bring death or life. Those who love to talk will reap the consequences."
I think what's cool about that is there's the side that we just talked about, how much pain you can inflict with words. But I think I'm going to paraphrase this if I don't remember exactly, but there's another proverb that talks about how the words of a friend are like a soothing balm. Like, your words can also bring immense life to people. And I think our goal shouldn't just be like, oh, I should say less bad stuff. I should be less hurtful with my words or whatever. But our goal should be, how can I be more life-giving?
Yes.
My words.
Yes, because one of the other proverbs, and this may be something similar to what you were thinking about, says that talks about how the wounds of a friend are better than the kind words, or so-called, or the that build you up from an enemy. So I'd rather have a friend tell me you've got spinach in your teeth than have an enemy say, you look great, fantastic. And then later on, after talking to thousands of people a day, I look in a mirror and say, oh, I got the spinach in my teeth. That's a silly example, but that's the idea. We love enough to speak the truth in love, because that helps build up. All right. So we have for you a sheet here that has has a number of verses for each one of these categories. Just the Bible reference, all right? So that you can look them up for yourself. Now, we said a few minutes ago about we need to think before we speak. We need to pray before we speak. And I said we need to know what God says about what we're saying and what we're doing and what we're thinking before we'll go there. So what I would encourage you to do is to take this sheet with you. And you can break it up maybe over several days. But go and start looking at some of those verses. If you've got a Bible, old-fashioned book Bible, maybe highlight these verses in it. If you've got a Bible on your phone, there's ways to highlight there too, so that these things start to get into your consciousness. They start to become a part of your thinking, because when you think wisely, according to what God says is wisdom, then you're going to be more apt to speak wisely and to think wisely, to feel wisely, and to act wisely. All right? But let me close by saying this. It may seem really hard for us, for many of us at times, to act wisely or to think of ourselves as being wise. But in the New Testament, it says this. Jesus' half-brother, a guy by the name of James, said, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach. In other words, he's not going to say, stupid question. And it will be given. If we ask God for wisdom, he will give it generously. That means more than enough if you simply ask him. You see, the point of this wisdom literature, including Proverbs, is that God is the source of life and God is the source of wisdom. And to know how best to live and how his wisdom works best in this creation of everybody, we have to get to know him. True wisdom can't be fully obtained and cannot be fully lived out without knowing the Lord. Now, the things that we've talked about, the things we see in Proverbs, they have a general blessing that they can give to anybody. Doesn't matter Buddhist, Muslim, atheist, or Christian. There is some benefit to all of these things, but we can't fully live this stuff out without knowing the Lord. And knowing the Lord comes through faith in Jesus. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 was talking about how from his culture as a Jewish man, how in that time they saw everybody in two categories. You're either Jewish, or you are what we would translate as Gentile. They oftentimes called them Greek. So it's just two categories. You were one of the Jews or you were everybody else, which they called a Gentile. And he said in 1 Corinthians 1:22, Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom. You know, the Greeks had their philosophers and they were always talking about wisdom. He says, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. In other words, a stumbling block meant weakness. Rather than a sign and of great power, it was weakness. And rather than what seemed like wisdom to the Greeks, it seemed like foolishness. But to those who are called, those who have heard the call to faith in Jesus, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Listen to that again. Christ is the power of God and Christ is the wisdom of God. If you want to know how to live life wisely and have the power to live wisely, then it all starts with Jesus. He's the power of God and he's the wisdom of God. It's only through faith in him that you can truly be wise.